Namaste. So tonight I'm going to read Book 9, Chapter 35 on the description of the various hells for the various sinners in the Maha Devi Bhagavatam. Om Vakratu Namaka Kodiswarisam. Hari Om Tat Sat. Dharmarajan said, O chaste one, without serving the gods, the karma ties can never be severed. The pure acts of the seed are the seeds of purities, and the impure acts lead to impure seeds. If any brahmana goes to any unchaste woman and eats her food, he will have to go ultimately to the Kala Sutra hell. There he lives for 100 years, when ultimately he gets a human birth, when he passes his times as a diseased man, and ultimately he gets purified. Those women who are addicted to their one husbands are called Pativratas. Those addicted to two persons are named Kulatas. To three are called Darsinis. To four called Pumshalis. To 6 persons called Vaisyas. To 7, 8, 9 persons are called Pungis, and to more than these are called Mahaveshyas. The Mahaveshyas are unfit to be touched by all the classes. If any brahmana goes to Kulata, Darsini, Pumshali, Pungi, Pangi, Vaishya and Mahaveshyas, he will have to go to the Matsyura Kunda. Those who go to Kulatas remain there for 100 years. Darsinis remain for 400 years. Those who go to Pumschalis for 600 years. Those who go to Vaishyas for 800 years. Those who go to Pungis remain for 1,000 years, and those who go to Mahaveshyas remain in the Matsyura Kunda for 10,000 years. My messengers chastise and beat and torment them very severely, and when their terms expire, the Kulata goers become Titris, a bird. The Darsini goers become crows. The Pumschali mongers becomes cuckoos. The Vaisya haunters become wolves. The Pungi goers become for 7 births boars. If any ignorant person eat food during the lunar and solar eclipses, he goes to Aruntuda Kunda for as many years as there are particles in that food. He then becomes born diseased with gulma, a chronic enlargement of spleen, having no ears, no teeth, and after passing his time so, he becomes freed of his previous sin. If anybody makes a promise to give his daughter to one, but he gives actually to a different person, he goes to Pamsukunda, where he eats ashes for 100 years. Again, if anybody sells his daughter, he sleeps on a bed of arrows in Pamsu Vesta Kunda for 100 years, chastised and beaten by my messengers. If any Brahmana does not worship with devotion the phallic emblem of Shiva, he goes to the dreadful Sulaprota Kunda for that heinous sin. He remains there for 100 years, then he becomes a quadruped animal for 7 births, and again he becomes born a Divala Brahmin for 7 births when he becomes freed. If any Brahmana defeats another Brahmana in a bad, useless argument and trifles him and makes him tremble, he goes to the Prakampana Kunda for as many years as there are hairs on his body. If any woman, being very furious with anger, chastises and uses harsh words to her husband, she goes to Ulkamukha Kunda for as many years as there are hairs on his body. My servants put fiery meteors or torches in her mouth and beat on her head. At the end of the term, she becomes a human being, but she has to bear the torments of widowhood for 7 births. Then she is again born as disease when at last she gets herself freed. The Brahmana woman, enjoyed by a Sudra, goes to the terrible dark Andakupa hell, where she remains day and night, immersed in the impure water, and eats that for 14 Indra's life periods. Her pains are unbounded, and my messengers beat her severely and incessantly. At the expiry of the term in that hell, she becomes a female crow for 1,000 births, a female boar for 100 births, a female fox for 100 births, a hen for 100 years, a female pigeon for 7 births, and a female monkey for 7 births. Then she becomes a Chandali in this Bharata, enjoyed by all. Then she becomes an unchaste woman with the ptosis disease, a washerwoman, and then an oil woman with leprosy when she becomes freed. O fair one, the Vaishyas live in the Vidana and Jalarandra hells. The Pungis live in the Dandata Dhana hell. The Kulatas live in the Diha Churna hells. The Swarinis live in the Dalana hells. The Dharasinis live in Susana hells. Their pains know no bounds at all those places. My messengers always beat and chastise them, and they eat always the urine and feces for 1 manvantara. Then, at the expiry of their hell period, they become worms or feces for 1,00,000 years, when they become freed. If a Brahmana goes to another Brahmana's wife, if a Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra do so, they go to the Kasaya hell. There they drink the hot Kasaya water for 12 years when they become purified. The lotus-born Brahma has said that the wives of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, etc. live in hells like Brahmins, Kshatriyas, etc. and they get freed. If a Kshatriya or Vaishya goes to a Brahmin's wife, he is involved in the sin of his going to his mother and goes and lives in the Surpa hell. There the worms of the size of a Surpa bite that Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and that Brahmana's wife. My messengers chastise them, and they have to eat the hot urine. Thus they suffer pains for 14 Indra's life periods. When they become boars for 7 births and goats for 7 births, when at last they are freed, now if anybody makes a false promise or swears falsely, taking the tulsi leaf in his hands, if anybody makes a false promise, taking the Ganges water, Salikrama stone, or any other images of God in his hand, if anybody swears falsely, placing his right palm on the palm of another, if anybody swears falsely, being in a temple or torching a brahmana or a cow, if anybody acts against his friends or others, if he be treacherous or if he gives a false evidence, then all these persons go to Javalamukha hell and remain there for 14 Indra's life periods, chastised and beaten by my messengers and feeling pain as if one's body is being burnt by red hot coal. One who gives a false evidence with the tulsi, holy basil, in his hand becomes a chandala for 7 births, and one who makes a false promise with the Ganges water in his hand becomes a mlecha for 5 births. One who swears falsely while touching the Salikrama stone becomes a worm of the feces for 7 births. One who swears falsely touching the image of the god becomes a worm in a Brahmin's house for 7 births. One who gives a false evidence touching with the right hand becomes a serpent for 7 births. Then he becomes born as a Brahmin, void of the knowledge of the Vedas. When he becomes freed, one who speaks falsely while in a temple is born as a Divala for 7 births. If one swears falsely, touching a Brahmana, one becomes a tiger. Then he becomes dumb for 3 births. Then for 3 births he becomes deaf, without wife, without friends, and his family becomes extinct. Then he becomes pure. Those that rebel against their friends becomes mongoose. The treacherous persons become rhinoceroses. The hypocrite and treacherous persons become tigers, and those who give false evidence become frogs. So much so that their 7 generations above and 7 generations below go to hell. If any Brahmana does not perform his daily duties, Nitya Karma, he is reckoned as Jada, an inert matter. He has no faith in the Vedas. Rather, he laughs at the Vedic customs. He does not observe vows and fastings. He blames others who give good advices. Such persons live in Dhumrandakara hell, where they eat dark smoke only. Then he roams about as an aquatic animal for 100 births successively. Then he becomes born as various fishes when he is freed. If anybody jests at the wealth of a deva or a brahmana, then he, with his 10 generations above and below, becomes fallen, and he himself goes to the Dhumrandakara hell, terribly dark and filled with smoke. There his pains know no bounds, and he lives there for 400 years, eating smoke only. Then he becomes a mouse for 7 births, and he becomes a various birds and worms, various trees and various animals, when ultimately he gets a human birth. If a Brahmin earns his livelihood by being an astrologer, or if he be a physician and lives thereby, or if he sells lac, iron, or oil, etc., he goes to the Nagavstana Kunda hell, where he lives for as many years as there are hairs on his body, tied up by snakes. Then he becomes born as various birds. Ultimately, he gets a human birth and becomes an astrologer for 7 births and a physician for 7 births. Then for some time, he becomes a cowherd milkman, for sometimes a blacksmith, for sometimes a painter. When he becomes freed of his sin, O chaste one, thus I have described to you all the famous kundas or hells. Besides, there are innumerable small kundas. The sinners go there and suffer the fruits of their own karmas and travel through the various wombs. O fair one, what more do you now want to hear? Say. Here ends the 35th chapter of the 9th book on the description of the various hells for the various sinners in the Maha Puranam Srimad Devi Bhagavatam of 18,000 verses by Maharishi Ved Vyasa. Jayanti Mangalakali Bhadrakali Kapalita Vakashmari. Om Tuya Mata Chabita Tuya Tuya Bandhushya Sakatva.